Hi, my name is Jamie Tomey, and I am pleased to welcome you to the Evanston Bound Quarantour series, brought to you by Artist Book House. Each week we get to talk to some amazing book artists and writers, letterpress printers, and paper makers. It's such a good time. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's Quarantour from Artist Book House. We're here today with Melissa Blount, who's actually only about 6 blocks away from me right now, just a little bit that way in Evanston. Melissa is a licensed clinical psychologist, writer, and artist who creates textile art and quilts, exploring the notions of trauma and white supremacy. Through community sewing circles, she cultivates unique opportunities for people to bear witness to the unjust and violent loss of life in communities of color. I would go into all of your influences, Melissa, but I think you're going to talk about those during your slideshow, so I won't. But I just want to say hi. I wish I could give you a big old hug.
I know.
So I need everybody to know who is on this Zoom. If you know Melissa personally, you know she is the best hugger in the entire world. Her hugs just embrace and envelop and just hold you close, and they're so full of heart and joy that it's really hard to see you across the screen and not be able to just sit with you and hug you.
Oh, Jamie.
Yeah. So usually we start with the question, how did you become a book artist? But of course we've expanded all of our programming, and we have included literacy and literary people and all kinds of writers and such. And so I was trying to decide how to ask that question in a way that fit your work. Mm-hmm. And the only way that I could come up with it is, how did you come to be a visual artist at this point in your life? Because you weren't an artist, or you didn't call yourself an artist until recently. So how did that happen for you?
Okay, I'll try to do the short version. It was like a confluence of a lot of things. We moved to Evanston in 2014, and I started going to these like race talks that the YWCA would have, and they were really interesting. And so I got involved in the community, or introduced to the community in that way. And then I can't remember, I'm fast forwarding a little bit, I can't remember exactly how I met Lisa D, but I was talking to Lisa D about the campaign that myself and some other friends have been doing with distributing the Black Lives Matter signs.
Yeah.
And so we got connected with Lisa D, and then Lisa D was really curious about Ben's art. And so I was talking to Lisa about my quilts, and she was like,
wait a minute,
at that meeting, she was like, and what do you do with these quilts? And you would just show the quilts? And I was just like, yeah. And I hadn't even made a quilt yet. And
right.
so Ben did this show in 2017, and Lisa asked me to be part of his artist talk.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and I was kind of like, now why would I be a part of Ben's artist talk? But the interesting thing about, Ben and I just had an anniversary this past Monday, and it's been 18 years married, 20 years together. And so we're very different, separate in our artistic approach, but everything is kind of a collaborative effort. So when I did the artist talk with him, he was talking about one piece that I'll show in the slideshow, which is 275 holidays. And when he did that piece, that sparked my notion of how to do the quilt, because the quilt until that point was just too big of a concept. And also living in Evanston, we have Northwestern University and the Black Museum, right in our backyard. So
Yeah.
I've been going to a lot of stuff there. And an artist who is incredibly influential, Marie Watt, was doing sewing circles at the Block Museum. And so I went to those sewing circles. So it was just a perfect kind of fit where I was like, okay, I'll do a quilt. And then having participated in Marie's sewing circles, I was like, that's the perfect way to kind of introduce the quilting in a community kind of way. And so out of the quilt, everything else has evolved that I'm currently doing now. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. It makes perfect sense. And I remember that exhibition of Ben's, and I remember the artist talk. It was on a Sunday afternoon. And for those of you who don't know, Lisa D is Lisa Delutoni, and she runs Evanston Made. She founded it, and she has a little gallery at the corner of Greenleaf and Florence. And it's a small gallery. I think my living room is actually bigger than her space. And my living room is not that big. And it was packed to the gills. We couldn't find seats when we got there, and we were early. And people were out spilling out into the sidewalk. That's how packed your artist talk was with Ben. And so it was phenomenal. And I am so pleased to hear that story, that was sort of a kickoff for you to recognize your own artistic what's the word I'm thinking
like
of?
Agency, or
your own ownership of being an artist, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, because Ben up until that point had really been an artist, and I had been pushing him to do more of his art in a public way.
Yeah.
And he would always say to me, like, why are you pushing me? Why don't you do your stuff? Like, you're artistic. And I was like, well, I didn't go to school to be an artist. You went to school to be an artist.
Right. I love that. I really, really love that.
So this is a slideshow predominantly about the Black Lives Matter Witness Quilt Project, which is what I just discussed as my first artistic endeavor. And so I'm gonna go, skip over the trauma stuff. But what I just mentioned was Ben's piece, which was the impetus for this. During that artist talk, someone asked Ben, how did it feel to do the research for this piece? And Ben said, well, it was quite brutal, because he had to go to this website called Murder Timeline, and it lists all of the murders in 2016. So Ben memorialized all of the Black men and boys who had been killed in 2016 on a 2017 calendar. And Ben said, doing that research, he felt like he was skipping over Black women and girls who had been murdered. And so that's when I was like, okay, I'll do a quilt about that.
Yeah.
How do I go to the next slide? And then this is Marie Watt's work. That was the final piece of all of the
sewing
pieces we worked on in her circle. My quilts are really based on the work of the women of Gee's Bend in Gee's Bend, Alabama. So I just have an example of their quilts and how it informs what my quilt looks like. And another influence is my friend Rachel Wallace, who did this quilt piece called Gone But Not Forgotten, where she memorialized all of the folks who have been killed by the police.
Oh, wow.
And this is Takia Holmes. She was 11 years old, and she was killed on a playground in 2016. And those are the stars on the quilt. And the quilt is in the colors and in the mindset of the Chicago flag. This is Canary Gentry Bowers. She was killed at the age of 12, and again on the playground on the south side. Another quilt square. And people in the community during the quilting circles would work on one quilt square, and many hands would touch each square, because somebody would draw it and start the design, and then other people in the community would finish it. And that's
Right.
me piecing together the block.
And I remember, am I remembering correctly that some of the quilt sewing circles were at the Willard house and some were
Yes.
at this is the one at the Block Museum or at this
This was the
center.
largest one. This is the largest one we had. And I partnered with Dina Lewis is one of the co-founders of Love and Protect. And they support women in oh my goodness, and women identifying folks and people, women of color who have been what they call criminalized survival. So the other flip side of the women who are on the quilt, I would say maybe 60% of those women are on that quilt because of intimate partner violence.
Oh,
and so the women and women identifying folks that Love and Protect work with are women who have been incarcerated because they defended themselves.
Right.
So we partnered with them, and at that circle, we also wrote postcards to people. And that's my friend Emily, and then that's Lori, and I think that's Lisa Levine looking at pieces that they probably done on the quilt. And that's the quilt is about 9 by 9. So it's pretty big. And that's the mother-daughter.
Yeah, where's the quilt now?
The quilt now is, I think I have a picture of it. The quilt is up at these are the ABC women, and I can talk about those later, but that the quilt and the ABC women are up in an exhibit in Michigan City at the Lubeznik Arts Center, and they're up until October. So these are some of the reasons why I love quilting and doing the sewing circles. I love the idea of beloved community and, the whole notion of the empathetic thread and, such a deep ancestral way of communicating with folks. There's sacredness in the act of quilting and forming the circles. And what I'm trying to do with my work is to make things visible, to have Bryan Stevenson from the Equal Justice Initiative talks about getting closer and more proximate to issues. And so that's what I'm trying to do in my work too. And that's it.
Awesome. Can you go back to the alphabet women slide? Because I do want to talk about this one a little bit more too. So the quilt was kind of the kickoff piece, the first quilt, the Black Lives Matter quilt. And you started that one in 2017 or 18?
2017, March of 2017.
So just 3 years ago. And we had several sewing circles as well, because of course, Black women and girls continue to be murdered in Chicagoland. And so you're making the second.
We had them at the library.
We had them at the library. We had a couple. We had we had them at the South Branch and at the North Branch. And at the North Branch also, we showed this alphabet book. I call it an alphabet book because to me that's what it is. Can you talk a little bit about this before I start talking about it? Because I love this work. I love this series, this piece, this book, this abecedarium. So why don't you tell us what this is, and then we can talk about the next quilt with the Trans Lives Matter as well.
Sure. So the ABC women were born out of Ben did an abecedarium. I can't even remember, some years ago. And I always wanted to figure out how to do one. And so I was like, I'll make these IKEA dish towels as textile pages.
Yeah.
In my, ABC book displaying Black girl magic. And I really did this for a very selfish reason because, there's just so much death and despair in the Black Lives Matter witness quilt that I was like, I don't want to reduce Black womanhood to tragedy.
Right.
And I really wanted to figure out how to celebrate and lift Black women up. And it really turned into this incredibly powerful exercise in discovering women I had just never heard of. Everybody's heard of like Harriet Tubman and who else is on there that's pretty well known? Zora Neale Hurston. People have heard of Zora Neale Hurston, but I don't know if people can see. B is Bridget Biddy Mason. And she was this total badass who was enslaved in some place like in the Midwest, like southwest part of the country, and made her way across the country to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And became this real estate maven and became one of the first Black millionaires.
I love that.
And started the first AME church in Los Angeles, which is still going strong today.
Yeah. So we have a couple things in the chat. Maria Burke says, I love that the two of you inspire each other's art. You and Ben inspire each other. And then Evanston Maid, hello, says the artist talk for your work at Lubeznik, I can never pronounce it. Lubeznik is on the 13th at 1:00, and carpool in Michigan City. Carpool out to Michigan City. So yes, I love this alphabet book. I love this work, and I love that it's on IKEA towels. And
yeah, I love that part too. And here's one. I have one in the studio. This one was up at the library, so this is Sojourner Truth.
Yeah, can you stop your screen share so that we can see your screen big?
Oh, yeah.
Stop your screen share. And also Rebecca in the chat says, would really love to give a paper version of this book to my nieces and nephews. Will you make something like that one day? Is that idea maybe later Ben could letterpress it? Oh, no, don't put Sojourner down. Bring her back
don't
up.
Put it down?
Yeah,
okay.
No, we didn't get to see her up close. And yes, this was one that was at the library. Polymer plates, Ken says. These, and I have to say, for those of you who haven't seen these pieces, this is all hand embroidered. So in those dark parts where it's her hair, it's very, very meticulous hand embroidery on all of this. So they're just gorgeous. And they were hanging, we had them at the South Branch for a while. We had them at the North Branch for a while. Hopefully they'll move over to Main Branch at some point, because now that's our only library. And Ben says, yes, indeed. All right, so we roped your husband into helping print those one day. We'll make the paper out of something lovely and relevant. IKEA towels. We'll beat IKEA towels and make paper out of them. Yeah. It's collaboration.
I get that question a lot, and one of the things, I haven't had my work really photographed well. And so that's a part of it too. So I gotta get that done.
Yeah, we got to get you on that stuff. So I did, one of my questions on here was what draws you to embroidery and textile art as an art form? And you kind of mentioned that healing of handiwork and that working with your hands and doing those small things, and also the community aspect of a quilt, or that whole historical piece of quilting bees, that part of it. But can you talk a little bit more about what you love about embroidery and what you love about the tactileness of it and the calmingness of it for you as an artist?
Yeah, it's just that it's impossible to be anxious and do handwork at the same time. So it's like taking a Xanax, but
It's like
you
a
don't get
physical
addicted.
Xanax. Yeah, you don't get addicted. I'm going to argue that I feel like some of us can get addicted to embroidery, but not.
That's true, but it's like you can only get so crazy with embroidery.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't affect your physical self as much as some of the other things that calm you in the same way.
But yeah, I love it, and I love the way that you get this kind of instant gratification when you're doing. It's like the work comes alive, and especially when I'm working on the pieces with respect to the women's lives, I'm imagining who those women are,
Mhm.
what they went through, who loved them, um, who's grieving them. So that's what the Black Lives Matter witness quote. For the women, the ABC women, I'm just like, wow, the humanity of these Black women is so large.
Mhm.
And to have the racism that exists in our country, um, the way that racism shrinks the lives
Yeah.
and negates the humanity
Mhm.
of Black people, it's a way for me to like physically work through what I call the trauma of white supremacy.
Yeah, so you're actually going through the process of that each time you stab your little needle into the.
Yeah, yeah, that's what my friend Shannon Downey says.
Yeah,
She's an
yeah, I
embroider craftivist, and so yeah, she was like, let's stab some shit.
Yeah. So I'm gonna ask these two questions. Actually, I'm gonna answer Nancy's question because she was saying the Abecedarium was a collaborative project. Yes, many hands working on each one. No. So the alphabet book, the ABC Women that we showed at the North Branch and the South Branch, that was just Melissa's hand on those pieces. The quilts, the two quilts, the Black Lives Matter quilt and the Trans Lives Matter quilt about the women who have been murdered, those are community based. And so those are collaborative. And so Sean says, anything to say about which portrait is selected for each piece? So how did you choose the actual portraits that went on the women for the ABC Black women?
I mean, it was very utilitarian, really. I was like, okay, who's who
Yeah,
I would go and Google like who are Black women with, a and so the more complex ones were Q and X and
right.
Z. Those were really hard. So that introduced me to this artist that I'd never heard of, Zenobia Bailey. I'd never heard of her and came across her work. So she's X.
That's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how long was that project from like initial thinking of it, concept to the final pieces?
Oh, Ben would tell you what a hell house our household was because um, I did that piece for last year's I think it was Evanston made group show at Pittner.
Yeah, that was
And
the Evanston Made month in June in
right,
2020. Was it 2018 or 2019? Because I thought we showed them.
2019. It was last
Oh,
year.
boundary issues, June 2019. Thank you. Yes, but for some reason, was it really just this February that we did the Trans Lives Matter quilt?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? This is the thing, and this is where sometimes Ben and my collaboration turns into arguments. Ben and I had a show together at Noise.
Okay.
So I think I came up with this idea in November of 2018.
Right.
And so Ben said, okay, you're going to do this Abecedarium and you have to make 26 pieces. This show opens on January 11th. Are you
Okay.
going to be able to get all of those letters done by January 11th? And I was like, yes, I will. You're killing my dream. Like you're not believing I can do it. So on the morning of January 11th, as I was doing number 13, he was
He was like, you were only half marathon through your marathon. And he says, so Ben dropped into the chat word at noise for Black History Month. That's
right. So
then it
worked
became
out.
boundary issues. Yeah.
So the first 13 were shown at noise. And then I had the last 13 to do for the full showing at the boundary issues in June of last year.
This is what happens with my COVID brain, is that for me, because it's been so long since March, since everything has been shelter in place and quarantours and all the things, is that my brain has added an additional year onto this whole thing. Because I can't fathom that it was just February of this year that you and I sat and watched the film, and then like a week later we did the Trans Lives Matter quilt circle, and it was like bam, bam, bam. I can't.
And that we could touch. That we could actually touch each other.
We could touch each other and hug each other, and like, yes, I can't. My brain can't fathom that. So I appreciate the coherence of all of the people in this Quarantour today, keeping me in line, saying, no, it was literally just last year. So I think you've touched on this also as well, but how does social justice drive your work as an artist, as a psychologist, and as a writer? Or do you see all of those things combined into your identity and working as one with social justice as a thing? Does that question make sense to you?
Wait a minute, say it one more time.
So how does social justice and issues of social justice, because you work a lot with the trauma of white supremacy in your work, how does that drive your work as an artist, as a psychologist, and as a writer? Are those three identities in you overlapping and combining and swimming together when it comes to social justice and the trauma of white supremacy and working through those issues with your art, with your patients, and with your writing? I have a tendency, as you know, to ask 1,000 questions in one, so I apologize for that. But how does it drive your work? Like, is that your primary focus, is to work through those social justice issues, and how does it affect your other work in life?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I there are times where I get exhausted by that drive, because I would really love to just learn how to embroider flowers and work in my garden and and just kind of be this full human being. But every part of my life is touched by racism. Every part of my life is touched by being a woman. And so sitting at those intersections and certain privileges too. Like my grandmother literally at one point was walking to Langston University. She was the first one in her family to get a college education.
Yeah.
And because she did that, she shifted the trajectory of the people in my family.
Yeah.
So there is a certain responsibility, I feel, to really address these issues and talk about the suffering of Black folks, and to also, when I learned early on, when I went to grad school to get my doctorate, I had this professor, Jack Michaels, and one of the most profound things that he said that shapes what I do today is that behavior always happens in a context. And so my art is always trying to provide context for Black people, because what people do is they extrapolate what are really symptoms and act as if those are just root, the causes within themselves. So people talk about gun violence, for instance. And it's
Right.
like, why is all this violence happening, at such a 200% increase? And okay, so do we just say Black people are inherently violent? Or do we say this is because people have been out of work
Yeah.
since March? People, they've cut the $600 uh, money that they're giving the people. Like, let's put this into context. So
Yeah.
that I guess I don't know if that answered your question, Jamie, but yeah, all of my art is either trying to put Black folks into a humane context or to celebrate Black people, especially Black women's humanity. And
Yeah.
I do that in the therapy room too, because especially after George Floyd was murdered in such a horrific way, the call had been, like, are you, I need an appointment. I need an appointment. So
Right. Right. Right.
unfortunately, my practice has not suffered in the economic hardship.
Right. Right. So that brings me to the thing I posted in the Facebook group the other day, the Artist Bookhouse Facebook group, the link to the Danger of a Single Story TED Talk,
Mm-hmm.
because Oliver had to do that for school, and he had already watched it in middle school because the teachers at Shoot are amazing, and so for his humanities class at ETHS, it's all remote, but they had to watch it again. And I was listening to it. And so I have heard it and listened to it and watched it and taught that video a few times. And what I'm getting from you and from your work, of course, and knowing you is that danger of a single story, is that idea of Black people are inherently violent because of this, and not putting it into a context and not doing the having that single story be the one thing that people see. And
Well, you know what, Jamie, this is the thing. It's not even a single story. It's a false narrative.
it's a false narrative. Yes.
So that's what it is.
Yeah. And it's like the lie taking over and not allowing for that humanity and three-dimensionality and that depth and that life of anyone in this situation, right? So yeah, I appreciate your helping me think through that little piece. So I'm gonna go through the next questions here, and I also appreciate your answering that question too. What moments in your life as an artist have resonated or stuck with you the most? And how do those moments then translate into future artwork?
Okay, so this is the most recent thing. Wait a minute, ask me that question again because I think this fits. And let me put Sojourner down.
Yeah. So,
okay.
And I also want to see your pieces, your most recent pieces on the napkins too, if you want to hold those up in a minute, because we've got 20 more minutes, so we've got time.
Okay, well, this one fits with, I think, the question that you're about to ask.
So what moments in your life as an artist have resonated or stuck with you the most? And then how do those moments show up later or translate into your artwork in the future? How do you hold on to those moments and spill them out into your artwork? So what moments in your life as an artist have resonated the most?
Okay, so and I can't find it. But I did this piece a long time ago called Fuck White Supremacy.
Yeah, I remember that one.
And people loved it. And when I posted it on my Instagram page, it wasn't finished.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of embarrassed that people were sharing it because I was like, it's not really finished. So I finished the piece. But, we're in such this culture of likes that that was a significant moment because, my Instagram page is people that I know
Yeah.
and who love me and you know, but when George Floyd was murdered, you know, that started to trend, and so people found that piece and really started sharing it. And so I was like, oh, okay, so this right now is something that is really trending. You know, like Ben is always on me about social media and utilizing the the uh um the power
Yeah. Yeah.
and the platform of social media, especially Instagram. So
Yeah.
that piece got like maybe 5,000 likes, and I was just like, "What is happening? Like this is insane!"
Yeah.
And I started to get some hate too. So
Of course. Yeah.
that was interesting. But most recently, you know, I don't know if people pay attention to Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion's song, but it's an acronym, and the acronym is WAP,
Yeah.
and it stands for wet ass pussy, right? And so people have just been up in arms about the vulgarity of it, but I really love that song because it's two young women who have had, I suspect, trauma in their lives and had to do things out of necessity to survive, and
Right.
have flipped the script and have turned a celebration of their sexuality into this like summer, you know, anthem. And people are just outraged and losing their minds, and people are really happy and celebrating and really grooving to it. And I just think that the conversation around their artistry informed this piece that I want to do. So there was another woman who's a filmmaker, and on her Instagram page, she had WAP, and it stood for What About Prosecuting the Cops That Killed Breonna Taylor? And so I
Right.
was like, yes, yes, that is it. Like turning that song, harnessing the power and the attention of that song to Breonna Taylor, that people are kind of, no, people aren't ignoring it, but you don't hear Black women's names in the public space that you do for Black men.
Right.
And so I have really been focused on raising up Breonna Taylor. So I embroidered that saying and posted it, and that piece got like 27,000 likes.
Wow. Yeah.
And it was insane. And the level of hate and dis
That was coming at you from that
in the
piece?
conversation thread. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Can you talk a little bit about that
Yeah.
and how you dealt with that? The hatred?
Well, I kind of was like a little bit taken aback at first. And I also thought about, wow, people really do need therapy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that I was like, there are people who are really sick out there. And then the other thing I thought about, you know, people are so quick to say that you're profiting off of somebody else's pain,
Right.
rather than, you know, you're trying to raise into the public consciousness. And
Yeah.
so
Or
I just thought that
honoring
was
that. Yeah.
interesting. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, like
Yeah.
memorializing. Like there's
Yeah.
no way that and so yeah, and so I think, Jamie, you know, if I continue, which I will, into this area of focusing my art around social justice issues and issues that seem to be provocative where it shouldn't. Like when we first started doing the Black Lives Matter signs, people thought that was a political statement, and I
Right.
was like, is it really political to say that Black lives matter? That's not political. That's a human rights campaign.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a difference between the two, human rights versus
There is
politics.
a complete difference. And so it just, the way that these things kind of collide, I just feel a huge responsibility to do art that provides conversation, and I don't have any control over what that conversation is once I create it and put it out into the world. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, and I appreciate that.
Oh, and here's the piece.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if people can see it.
Yeah, that's just gorgeous. So now let's shift a second, because you had a sewing circle yesterday that was hosted by the library, Evanston Public Library, on Zoom. And the next one is going to be September 16th at noon through the EPL. So you can go to epl.org and register for it, for the Zoom. And so what is the focus of those sewing circles? What are you working on with the people in that Zoom session?
Well, this is the little kit that people can go and pick up from the library, or they can pick it up from Ben's studio. So what we're doing, and I try to always engage people in the community and highlight community stores too. So Dawn from Secret Treasures and Antiques, I get not all, but a lot of my textiles from her. And so you have a little napkin that comes in the kit, needle and floss. And so we have
the pattern.
Working on John Lewis's idea of getting into good trouble.
Yeah, I love that.
And so that's what I like, the notion of John Lewis saying that when you're fighting for justice, it will not be it doesn't have to be violent, but it definitely should be disruptive.
Yeah. And so people can still join even though they didn't join the first one, if they are able to on the 16th.
Now listen, I don't know, Jamie. A lot of this stuff is fly by the seat of my pants. So we made kits, and we're trying to figure all of those details out. But I'm letting my partner over at the library, Halka, figure that stuff out.
If you want to join, you can email Halka, and their email at the library is mhalka@cityofevanston.org, and you can just ask if you can join Melissa's sewing circle. And so on September 12th, you're hosting a sewing circle for the Breonna Taylor prosecution. What about prosecuting? And that one is going to be at the Colvin House and also on Zoom. Is that
that's actually going to be in person. We're trying to figure out how to do it safely.
Okay. And so eventually, once you and Vanessa figure that out, we'll put those on our Facebook group page. And we have a couple things in the chat, and then I have another couple questions for you. So Joanne Vina says, I can't stay, but I love your work and will be near Michigan City this weekend. I hope to see the work in person. She participated in the big workshop at Northwestern and hopes to continue to be inspired by as a stitcher by your work, and let Joanne know if you need more napkins. And then Ron says, hi Melissa, how do you hope your artwork will shift the trajectory of your daughter's life, of Sophia's life? Which yes, go ahead and answer Ron's question, and then I'll move on to my next question. For your 15-year-old, who, by the way, for all of you who are on this Zoom, if you don't know it already, Sophia is our phenomenal leader of our pandemic book club for teenage women and girls and female identifying people. And the next session is on September 12th, and they voted last month to read Trevor Noah's Born a Crime. So they'll be talking about that. So if you have a teenage person who identifies as female in your household or know of any of them, you can go to Eventbrite and search it up so that Sophia can have more people in her book group. So now I'll let you answer. I'm going to plug your daughter a little bit. She is a phenomenal group leader. She's amazing.
Yeah, she's really thoughtful. She was really sweet when I was getting all this kind of hate on that Instagram post. And she was just like, Mama, you have to address it. You have to address it. And I was like, what am I gonna say? Like, I'm not gonna get in an argument with these
With
folks.
complete
But
strangers. Yeah.
yeah, but my hope for Sophia is that she just gets to be a human being on the planet.
Yeah.
I hope she won't have to sell Black Lives Matter signs or T-shirts or you know uh, be so all encompassed by uh, social justice issues. I hope that she will just get to be a human being existing on the planet.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you feel like having artists as parents helps her grow in a more empathetic way or a more thoughtful way? She's an amazing kid. She's, or does she take it for granted? You know?
I think she takes it for granted. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
she does. She told Ben and I at one point during the pandemic, she was like, "You all are dictators. You are dictating my whole life. You are
Oh man,
controlling me."
she's a
And
teen. Come on.
and
That's what
she,
Meredith said, not me, because I have
yeah,
a teen who's like a year younger, and so I'm in the same way. Of course, I'm dictating.
yeah, and I'm just like Sophia. It's called parenting.
Yeah.
It's not dictatorship. You do not have an equal say in what happens in the house. And I think for Sophia, she takes for granted that like her friends and their families are having the conversations that we have all the time, that she just assumes that they're having those conversations too. And I think it's surprising to her. Like
Yeah.
we were talking last night about 3/5. Like, when did you find out? She's annoyed that they're studying the Constitution for the third time
Yeah.
and talking about Black people being 3/5 a human. And so she said, "Do you know there were people in my classroom like going, 'Oh my God, that's so horrible. I can't believe it.'" And she's like, "Where have you been?" You know? So
Yeah. 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 And there's the discussion also of parents of Black boys having to have the conversation if you're stopped by a police officer, and I suppose Black women as well. But
yeah, I'm glad you
I
said
think
that because
primarily,
yes,
yeah.
yes,
So
it is. And listen, this is the sticky thing with my work and the fine line I have to walk, because Black women do not only have to worry about the dangers in the world from police, but
mhm,
there is also the dangers that exist in the intimate partnership with relationships with Black men, that
right,
puts them at risk at times too. So there's
yeah,
a really thoughtful way that I have to put that behavior in context. but
yeah,
but yes, that is what women like Andrea Ritchie and Kimberly Crenshaw, who are phenomenal lawyers and legal scholars, who talk about the intersectionality of Black women's existence.
yeah, yeah. Lashandra dropped into the chat. My daughter says sometimes having parents with principles is too hard sometimes.
Oh, Lashandra, I know. Sophia says that we are really stifling her social life. She's like, "You're the only parents who care about this virus. Like,
Right.
people just let their kids go out." And I was like, "Well, I'm not their parent."
I'm not their parent. They
So,
can,
yep,
yeah, yeah.
yep.
So yes, all of us parents of teenagers right now, and particularly pandemic teenagers. Okay, so there's so much more to say about all of those things, but we only have a few more minutes, and I want to give people time to Brady Bunch it up and say things to you, not in the chat, but I don't know if there's a quick way to answer this next question, the next two questions, but your community sewing circles are a time to gather around together around a table, sewing and talking and working things out and building those partner friendship relationships and that beloved community that we were talking about. They're moments of honor and respect and togetherness and kindness. So how do you envision the pandemic changing them right now and in the future? Because of course we're on Zoom, we're not seeing each other in person right now. So that has to make a difference on how we connect. But do you think that'll change them in the future? Or are we going to just be like rushing back to the sewing circles as soon as this is all over? That's my view. Like, I gotta get some time together.
Well, I think, what I've been saying to people is that this is going to go on for a long time. The vaccine, I don't know who's going to feel safe enough to take this vaccine as being developed under this administration.
Yeah.
So my thought process is that I need to see people in person. I mean, like, we're having the fair this weekend. And so, wear a mask. And that's the thing about having the circle on the 12th for Breonna Taylor. We're going to ask that people wear masks and social distance, but that we are meant to be in community with one another.
Yes.
And so whatever way that we can do that is helpful. And the sewing circle yesterday, we weren't in person, but it was pretty meaningful and restorative.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that says a lot about you as a leader too, as a leader of the group, making people feel comfortable in this weird space as well.
Mm.
You're not going to take that compliment. You're like, Jamie. Oh, that's funny. Okay, so I'm glad that you mentioned Saturday's block party. That's happening between Crane and Greenleaf on Florence Avenue, which is where your new space is, which we're seeing behind you. It's 2 doors down from Ben's space. And in between yours and Ben's is Alice George and Beth Adler. And then down the street, there's 1100. There's a bunch of other artists who live on the street whose names I do not know. Artist Bookhouse is going to have Regin's work there this weekend in the middle of the street. There's a taco truck. There's going to be music, and it's going to be incredible. So it's Evanston made first Saturdays, if anybody can show up for that. Thank you, everyone, for coming. If you want to support Artist Bookhouse, please go to our website and donate. And thank you, Melissa. Hi again. Thank you so much for watching this week's Quarantour. We really appreciate your support. If you want to learn more about our guest from today, please read the description below. And if you'd like to support more programming like this, coming from Artist Bookhouse, please visit our website at artistbookhouse.org/donate. Thank you again for joining us.